It's breaking as a human spirit when you've lived for so long, thinking your life is one way, thinking that you are a specific person, having specific beliefs in your life, and then one realization just changes everything that you think about yourself and the people in your life. And that's what this did. It destroyed everything that I knew, and it was devastating. Looking back on it, it was a beautiful disaster. It really was. Because it led me to where I am now, and I am so much stronger now than I ever was years ago, and I'm so thankful for what I've gone through.
Welcome to the Juggling Life, Finding Balance podcast. I'm your host, Vivian Cummins. Now, I've known my guest, Jenna Nelson, for over 15 years. I'm proud to call her my friend. But even as her friend, I knew nothing about the long-buried trauma that she'd been living with since she was a teenage girl. It wasn't until I saw her face plastered across every major newspaper in Utah that I learned of the abuse. 17 years after the abuse, Jenna broke her silence. It's this act of courage that became the catalyst for her advocacy work. Jenna Nelson is the name and face behind House Bill 247, a legislative bill in Utah that extends the statute of limitations for reporting sex crimes against minors. In addition to Jenna's fierce work in Utah, she expanded her advocacy across the nation, confronting attorneys, state representatives, and even victims' advocates who fall short in supporting survivors. Friends, Jenna is here today to tell her story in hopes that it will raise awareness and help as many people as possible. She does so in a discreet, appropriate manner, but please use discretion whether you choose to listen or watch. In everything Jenna has accomplished to date, she gives all credit to God. Back in 2020, your name and your photo hit the Utah newsstands and it spread like wildfire. The legislative officials became very aware of who you were and of some pretty personal and private information about you. So to the extent that you feel comfortable, please share with us what led up to that moment.
I had an issue where I was sexually assaulted as a teenager, and the sexual assault had been continuing on for over 2 years. And it was by a guy that was a teacher in the community, so he was very well known by the public in Utah, especially in Davis County. And I finally reported him after 17 years. And I had found during my reporting process that there was a specific law in Utah that was getting in my way of doing anything real to hold him accountable. And so next thing I knew, I started working with our state legislature, and my photo was all over the newspapers, and I was doing interviews with reporters, and my face was on the front page of the paper. Talk about terrifying.
Yeah. So when you started to look into this, I mean, did you expect all of that attention?
No, not at all. I expected that I would make a phone call to the local police department. I would make a report. I expected that they would probably talk to him, probably charge him. Given the time frame that had gone by, I expected that maybe there might be just a day or two of jail time, if anything at all, maybe a fine that he would have to pay. But I expected his business license to be pulled, and for the word to get out there that he had been committing these crimes. And if there had been any other victims of his, that they would start to come forward. But that just wasn't the case. Instead, it was a lot of fighting with local law enforcement and the district attorney's office and the attorney general's office. And I mean, I could go on and on. Like, I started at the very, very bottom of law enforcement and worked my way all the way up to the Attorney General's office, trying to hold this man accountable. And in the process of all of that and working with changing laws, oh boy, my face, my name became very, very public, and a very private um, assault became very public. Um, I ended up having to tell my story to a lot of strangers, a lot of men, and mostly. And as a woman, when you've been sexually assaulted, that's really intimidating and scary. So it was tough to keep fighting, but I I have always felt since day one that I'm not finished in this process, so I keep talking.
So you mentioned that the assault happened in your teenage years, young teenage years, and that 17 years later is when you started talking about it. So where did you draw your strength from and courage to speak up?
At first, I didn't really think that there was any courage or bravery or strength. I was so weak and broken. Um, I I was a single mom. I had gone through a divorce. I had 3 young kids at home, and I was doing the single parenting, all by myself. My ex wasn't really much help, um, if ever. And I got into this state of depression, and I couldn't pull myself out of it. And so I went to my church and I asked if there was any help that they could offer me. And they set me up with a counselor through our church. And speaking with her for several months, I was able to find a comfort level with her. And we talked about everything from my family to my children and what was going on with them. And then one day it just popped out during the end of one of our sessions. I just flat out told her, I think next time we have something real to talk about, I think I was molested as a teenager. And that's basically how it came out. Like, I was totally confused. And she's like, wait, what? Sit down. And so we stayed there and talked a little bit longer. She was asking some open-ended questions to get me to talk about, why did I just make that statement? What was making me think that I had been abused as a teenager? And all I could really tell her was that I kept having like these snapshots and felt like I was reliving things that had gone on when I was a teenager. And they were all revolved around this specific individual and being sexually assaulted on multiple occasions. And then looking back even further, realizing that he had started grooming me from a fairly early stage in classes with him. And so he had created this scene where I trusted him. And he was that adult in my life that I could talk to and confide in. And I felt supported. And then my dad had a heart attack. And he was there for me and comforted me in my fear. And that's what he used to gain access to me. And so I was sharing that with my counselor at church, and we prayed a lot. She prayed for me a lot. I prayed a lot. I cried a lot. And oh boy, if it hadn't been for her and her support and just her constant comfort, I don't know that I would have been able to come out about any of it. And she had asked if I wanted to report. And my immediate answer at that time was no. I just want to process and heal. I just want to deal with this because it felt like this was the root cause of everything else in my life, all my poor decisions, all of my failures, all of my feelings of inadequacy, um, not being a good mom, not being a good daughter, not being a good friend. It all felt like it centered around this abuse. And she supported me in that. She didn't force me to report. She didn't tell me, hey, you really need to do this. She just said, we'll do what you are comfortable in doing and we'll work forward. If you just want to process and heal, that's what we'll do. And so that's what we started out doing. And I'm telling you, the amount of prayer that the two of us sat in the middle of my mess and in the middle of my chaos, and the hundreds of boxes of tissues, that's where I eventually found some courage, a little bit of strength. Although it didn't feel like I had courage or strength at the time, but that's really where I found it.
Oh, wow. Thank you for sharing all of that with us. So, I just, if I could, want to park on this for just a moment in that I love that our church at the time, it was my church too, at the time offered this program. So when they put you in contact with someone, was this someone an outside, like a therapist or something outside, or was it within the church? Because I'm just curious, for anybody who might be listening that maybe they find themselves in that space that they're needing to talk to someone and they don't know where to go. And it sounds like that your church and many other churches may have a program that you can go to and they have qualified people to help.
Absolutely. So, um, they connected me with somebody that I didn't know within the church. And this person had gone through some training to sit with people in moments of crisis. She wasn't a licensed therapist. Um, Basically, when we went through everything, she kind of became more like a life coach type of title, because she didn't have any formal training to obtain a license or anything like that. So, um, they, I put in a request with our church offices to get some assistance, and the person that was over the counselors that were assigned to our church prayed over it extensively, and like for a very, very long time. It took a while for her to pick the right person for me, which I appreciated that she took the time and didn't just throw me at just whoever was available at that time. She really put a lot of thought and effort into who she assigned me. And me and this individual, we ended up meeting weekly, and it went on for years. We met for years. And so this wasn't a just, hey, you get 6 weeks of counseling through our church. Hope you get something out of it and good luck. It wasn't anything like that. It was very thorough, and we worked through a workbook together, which gave us a lot of guidance on areas that we needed to focus on, and gave us specific scripture to address certain circumstances. So we could pray on that scripture, pray over the circumstance, um, converse about whatever came up with the specific questions that were in that book. And those questions ended up leading to where I was able to disclose the abuse. And not that the book was about abuse specifically, but because the questions were so open ended and so fluid, and her support was so constant and open and safe, I felt I was able to finally just be like, I'm confused. I don't know if this actually happened to me, but I think it did. And have that conversation and come to terms with the fact that, yes, I had been a sexual assault victim, and nobody wants to come to terms with that. That's terrifying. It's terrifying. And it's breaking as a human spirit when you've lived for so long thinking your life is one way, thinking that you are a specific person, having specific beliefs in your life, and then one realization just changes everything that you think about yourself and the people in your life. And that's what this did. It destroyed everything that I knew, and it was devastating. Um, but looking back on it, it was a beautiful disaster. It really was. Because it led me to where I am now, and I'm so much stronger now than I ever was years ago, and I'm so thankful for what I've gone through.
Oh, Jenna, bless your heart. Thank you for sharing that. I love how, I mean, God knows, God knew your heart, God knew what you were going to need. and how he would be able to give you the courage that you needed to do the things that he had in your future. And so I love that you had the prompting to go to the church. And so that's one of the things I just wanted to let the listeners know, because there's nothing wrong with going to a therapist or anything like that. But there's just something special about when God links you up with another believer to walk alongside you in your crisis. And so, not to say that you couldn't have received the help that you needed or the courage that you needed going to a therapist, but the fact that he just brought the two of you, and they prayed so long over putting you with the right person. And so I just think that that's absolutely beautiful. And I'm sure the two of you will always have a bonding relationship from that. So thank you for sharing that story. Um, so I want to, if we could, shift just a little bit. You've come to this realization. You don't want to report, you need to process. How long did it take you to kind of process through all of the grieving that needed to happen? And then what happened? You just woke up one day and said, okay, I want to do something about this. So can you take us down that journey?
I wish it was that easy. Um, so I think it was roughly about 4 months from the time that I had made the decision that I just wanted to heal and process from it until the point that I decided to report. And my decision to report, it was terrifying. It was absolutely terrifying. um, so I'll tell you
Did
a
you
little
go
story.
did you go alone? Sorry to
Oh,
interrupt you, but did you go by yourself, or did your new friend go with you, your counselor go with you?
oh boy.
Oh, that's the whole story.
It's the whole story. So Christmas Eve, Christmas Eve. My family, my parents, my sister, my kids, my ex-husband, we always do holidays together, or at least we did back then. And we had decided that we were going to do Christmas at my house the next morning. And so I went to Walmart to go get a few last minute things for food and stuff for the next day. And I've got my two twins with me. They were about 10 years old, and we're walking into the store where the carts are, and most Walmarts are the same. So where you go in to get your cart, there's typically like a separation of glass that leads into the store or to a restaurant that they may have, like McDonald's. And in this case, it was the Layton Walmart with McDonald's. And so I'm walking in and I've got my kids in tow, and I look up, and in the glass is my abuser. And he's standing
Oh
there with a cup
no.
of coffee, facing out towards the entrance of the store, looking at all the little kids that were walking in and out of the store
Oh,
with their.
Jenna.
And when you're the victim of sexual assault and you've been groomed, there's a certain look that a perpetrator has on their face that a victim will always recognize. And he had that look on his face. He was trolling for other victims. And so I grabbed my twins each by their hands, and I grabbed the cart and I raced through the store to grab the few items that I needed. Meanwhile, I'm hyperventilating the whole time, and my kids are yakking at me, hey, we want this toy and we want this. And I'm like, no, stop talking because I can't deal. And went through the checkout, got in the car, went home. And as soon as I got inside, I threw up. And I called my counselor and I said, I just had um, a realization. I need to report. He's still offending. He is still out there. And I just saw the look on his face that he was looking for a new victim. I asked to report. And she was in the process of dealing with family stuff because, hello, it was the holidays. And so we had made an arrangement to meet as soon as the holidays were over and discuss what was going on and what I had seen and everything that was going on within me. And I remember I didn't stop shaking for 2 solid weeks. until I spoke with her and I told her I wanted to report. And so there was a sheriff's officer that went to our church, and she asked that officer, a female officer, to come in and sit with us and talk to us about what steps I would need to take in order to report and what I could expect. And just discussed my options as far as who to report to and just everything that was contained in all of that, because there was so much information and I was terrified. And she gave me the phone number that I would need and gave me a few pieces of information that I would need to have handy. And she left. And it was just me and my counselor. And she asked if I was sure about this. And she said that she would stay with me as long as I needed. And so I picked up my phone and I dialed and I called the local police department. And I told them that I had a report that I needed to make. And I told them what it involved. And I remember trying to focus on my voice to maintain like a steady, calm tone instead of freaking out, because a lot of times when you're freaking out, people don't understand what you're trying to say and what type of help you specifically are requesting. And so I was trying to maintain a level of calmness. And I remember as I had my phone, I'm shaking and I went to turn it off and I dropped the phone down on the desk and I just started sobbing. And it was such a huge emotional release in that moment. Like I felt like I couldn't breathe. I couldn't talk. The tears would not stop. And this was our counseling session just before church started. And we heard the music starting up and church was starting. And my counselor came over and for the first time, she made physical contact with me and held me and just let me cry. And I sat there, I don't even know for how long. And she gave me the option. She said, church is starting. Do you want to stay here or do you want to go down to the service? And I shook my head. I couldn't even formulate words. And she sat with me. I swear we sat there for probably 2 hours with me just crying and her holding me. And we didn't say a word. And then we went home. um, I remember, so that was Sunday. Monday, I went to work and the police officer assigned to my case contacted me. He was a detective and he contacted me and said, I got your report that you called in and wanted to discuss it with you. And so I told my supervisor that I was going to need a little bit of time away from my desk in private. And I sat with him and gave him a lot of really ugly details, the ones that I could remember because it had been so long. And he asked me if I felt comfortable, if I was still in contact with him, to have a conversation with him. And I did still have contact with him on occasion. So it wouldn't be weird to have a conversation with him, like he wouldn't suspect anything. And the detective gave me a recording device and sent me on my way to go have this conversation with him. It took 3 tries. 3 tries of me meeting up with this individual who had abused me for so long. But I finally got him recorded saying some of the abuse that he had committed against me. And I was in shock. I was like, this man just said everything that I've been telling the police. This man just confirmed everything that has been going through my head. And all of these flashbacks that I was having, they're real. This really happened. And then the guy had the nerve to hug me after that conversation. And on the recording, you can hear, because I had put it under my shirt, just under my bra strap to secure it to me. And you can hear the rustling of my clothes on the recording. And the detective listened to that and he's like, what is that? I'm like, oh, that's where he hugged me. And the detective was like, he physically touched you. Really, after disclosing that he had assaulted you, he's physically making contact with you. I'm like, yes, he is. And they brought him in and they interviewed him for quite a while. And they've got him on videotape where they were asking him questions that he would deny. Like, did you ever, sexually assault Jenna Nelson? And he'd be like, no, never. Well, if we asked her, what do you think she would say? And he would dodge that question. And then they would be like, oh, did you ever pick her up for classes? And he would say, no, never. Well, if we asked her dad, what do you think he would say? And he'd say, oh, maybe I did once or twice. And so there was confirmation to the story that I had given them, and they wanted to arrest him. And in the process came up short. They said that they couldn't arrest him on any charges because the statute of limitation did not allow for that. And I'm like, okay, talk to me like a human being who doesn't know anything in law enforcement. Like, I don't understand what a statute of limitations means and why this is preventing you from charging this guy. And they're like, it's basically the time frame that you have to report a crime against you and that we're able to bring charges. And back when I reported, this was 12 years ago, they were looking at that current day's laws, which was fantastic when we were talking about it. But when they sent the charges that they wanted to issue to the DA looked at the law as it was written back when the crimes occurred. And back when the crimes occurred, there was a 4-year statute of limitations for reporting sex crimes against minors. And in the state of Utah, the word minors is a huge defining term. In Utah, you're a child if you're 13 or younger, and you're a minor from 14 to 17. And so there are specific laws targeted to children and specific laws targeted to minors. And I wasn't aware of that. That was a whole new thing to me. But I sat with the disappointment of he's not going to be charged. And for years, I kept contacting different agencies trying to figure out how I could make a difference to get him charged. Like, there's got to be something that has changed in the 17 years plus that would authorize them a chance to go after him. And there just wasn't. And so there was an interview that I did with the Deputy Attorney General of the state of Utah and his investigator. And this interview took 3.5 hours. I had my kids with me, and their office staff watched my children for the 3.5 hours that I spoke with the Deputy AG and the investigator. They asked me the most personal, horrifying, awful questions that you can possibly imagine, and I answered them all. I drew out diagrams of the studio that he had for his classes and his home, and wrote down details about his vehicle and all sorts of things. And the investigator went through and investigated my case for 2 weeks. And he contacted me later and he said, I've investigated your case and 100% validated everything in your story and estimate he's had at least 20 other victims since you. But we're not going to charge him.
Oh, dear.
Because of the statute of limitations that applied back then.
Oh, no, my gosh.
And that's when I started looking at the statute of limitations, like, what options do I have to change the statute of limitations so that it'll work? And so I kept calling the deputy AGs, like every few months I would call him. He probably hates me to this day for all of those several phone calls, because I would see news stations reporting on laws being changed relating to the statute of limitations on sexual assaults. And if these laws are being changed, why are they not affecting my case? And why is this guy still out on the street and not being arrested or charged? And so the biggest conversation that I had that led to where I am today was I called him, and there had been a law that changed, but it only related to children in Utah. It did not state minors. And I said, well, what do I need to do to get the law to change so it works for minors? And he said, well, that would mean changing the law. And I said, well, how do I change the law? And he says, well, you need to contact your representative. And I said, well, who's my representative? And he said, Representative Steve Handy. And I said, well, how do I contact Steve Handy? And I hear some buttons on his computer clicking, and he's like, here's his phone number. I'm like, cool. And from that second, that's when I decided I'm going to get to work on changing this law for other people.
Well, thank you so much, Jenna, for sharing all of that. I know it cannot be easy, and I just want to acknowledge that you are such an incredibly brave woman for sharing, and I know this is going to help so many people. So thank you for sharing all of that. Now, for those who are not familiar with how legislation works, can you share with us the steps that you had to take? I mean, how do you draft a bill? How do you get it before the state House of Representatives and the Senate? What do you do?
I'll be perfectly honest. I was politically ignorant. I didn't have the first clue what I was walking into. So when the deputy AG gave me the phone number to Steve Handy, I called him directly, and I was expecting it to just go to voicemail. However, it didn't. He picked up, and I had met him once before, and he had actually remembered me when I called. And I told him, I have an idea for a bill. There's a law that I think needs to be changed in the state of Utah, and I understand you're my representative, and I'd like to sit down and speak with you about it. And I remember he was in the middle of the 2019 legislative session, and I can hear like all sorts of chaos around him. And he's like, I want to give you the time that this needs and the attention that you deserve. So if you don't mind, when the session is over, I'll call you back and we'll sit down and talk about this. And I was just like, he's never going to call me back. Because you hear that all the time about people reaching out to their legislator and they never hear back from them. And so that's what I expected. But 2 weeks later, my phone rang and it was Steve Handy. And so we met up for coffee, and I told him about everything that I had been through and what I was wanting his help with to change this law. And he starts jotting down all of these notes, and he tells me, okay, we're going to draft a bill, and we're going to have to talk to legislative lawyers and language experts to make sure that this is all done correctly, but it's going to take time. This is not something that's going to happen overnight. I was like, okay, that's fine. I've been working on this for years already, so let's do this. And so there were huge gaps of time in between a lot of communication to get the bill drafted. And so Steve would call me and we would discuss like the statute of limitations currently says that a minor has 4 years from the date of the crime being committed to them to report. We need to change that. And so we started drafting all of these different things and editing it. And then finally we got to a place where we were comfortable with it, where we were extending the time frame that a person had to report. And he sent me a text one day and he says, "Kate, I'm dropping it in the hopper." And I'm like, that's a TV word. Come on.
What's that mean?
And so he basically said that there's a hopper you drop your bills into, it gets filed. And then when it gets closer to the legislative session, it will be reviewed by legislative lawyers, language experts, anybody that might have an interest in this bill or see something that is worded incorrectly that might change the definition of the actual bill. And so there were many, many phone calls and conversations between us meeting up in March of 2019 until the 2020 session. And one of those I remember was a phone call. We had like a conference call with 3 other people, me and Steve, and they're trying to change the words to the bill and change the statute of limitations that we're trying to extend it to. And I remember I was super just firm in what I wanted the bill to say. And initially I had wanted to just remove the statute of limitations altogether, because I don't see the need in having a time frame to report a sex crime. Sex crimes are the most heinous crimes next to murder. So why is there limitations set for those reports? But Steve had advised me, because nobody knew that this was an actual problem, that we were going to need to go in and educate people that this was a problem. And just going in and jumping in with both feet to remove it was not reasonable. And so we were just looking at extending it. And so these people that were on this conference call, they're trying to change the language, which would change the meaning of the bill. And I kept arguing against all of their suggestions. And Steve just silenced everybody. And he goes, "Hey, Jenna, this is your bill. We're going to do it how you want it. And it's either going to pass or fail. This is your bill." And I'm like, cool, let's leave it the way that it is. As long as there's nothing devastating in there that would, ruin it, let's move forward with how we have it. And so we did. And I went into the session thinking, oh, it's a one and done vote. Basically, like I'm going to walk in, they're going to vote, and it's either going to pass or fail. No, it doesn't work that way. So I ended up having to testify in front of two committees. I had to testify in front of the House Judiciary Committee and the Senate Judiciary Committee. And these are basically panels of senators and representatives that listen to your story and then vote to see if they want to move it on to the next step. And so I was working with Steve one night on what I wanted to say while I was testifying in the House Judiciary Committee. And we were on the phone until late at night, crafting all the words that I needed, making sure that it was short enough, but gave enough time to give all the information on why this was important. And I told him, Steve, I'm terrified to do this. Like, I don't do public speaking, and this is very private and personal. And he stopped me and he said, "Jenna, I am going to literally hold your hand through this whole thing." And he did just that. So the next morning, my counselor went with me. She drove, thankfully, because there's no way I could have. And we walked in together, and Steve and his intern, Zach, that year, Zach, by the way, was phenomenal in teaching me what to expect during this whole process. They sat with me, and when our bill was called, Steve got up and he held my hand and he walked me to the table. He sat me down, introduced the bill, introduced me, and let me speak. And the whole time was still holding my hand. And when I finished, he pulled out my chair, stood me up, walked me back to my table, sat me down, and went back up to debate the legislation with the committee. And so he did exactly what he said he would do. He held my hand through the whole thing. And at the end, the House Judiciary Committee voted unanimously to move it on to the next step. And so the steps that are involved in a bill is you've got your House Judiciary Committee, and then it goes to the House for a second read. It's basically just reading it into the record a second time. And then it goes to the full House for a vote. And then after that, you've got the Senate Judiciary Committee, their second vote or second read, and then the full Senate. And those are for House bills. And then for Senate bills, that is just reverse. So you start with the Senate and then move to the House for their full vote. If it passes out of those two, the House and the Senate, then your bill goes to the governor's desk for signature or veto. And so mine had made it through the House Judiciary Committee, the second read, and then went into the House of Representatives and passed there. And then we went into the Senate Judiciary Committee, and I had to testify again. And that was an interesting one. More to come on that. And then the second read, and then it went into the full Senate and passed there and went to the governor mid-March 2020 for his signature, which he signed it and passed.
Wow. Thank you for educating us on that, because I'm going to tell you, I don't remember learning any of that in school.
I don't either.
I know they taught it to us.
I don't know that I was ever taught because I skipped a lot of class, I'll be honest.
Oops.
But Zach, the intern, he would walk me through each step and tell me for that day what to expect. And apparently I was more involved in the working of this bill than most people are when they have an idea of a bill. I was there every day that it was discussed. I was there for every conversation. I was on the phone for phone conversations. Because I told Steve, I was like, I want to be involved. This is my bill. This is my idea. And I want to know the outcome of this bill and see if it's going to help anybody. And ultimately, this bill will never help my case, never, but it's going to help people moving forward. And that's really what I was after, is helping people know that as a minor, you're confused, you're scared, you don't know why you're having the feelings and emotions that you're having within your body. And this person just touched you in a way that you've been told is inappropriate as a child. But hey, it felt good, or it was exciting, but wow, what just happened? These these minors are not in a stage in their brain where they can make the decision to report or even to disclose to families that they were just assaulted. They can't even process the fact that they were assaulted and put that word on it. If you can't do that at age 14 and you've only got 4 years to disclose the crime to you, that's devastating. You'll never see justice a day in your life. And so coming out and talking about it, I'm hoping will give people the information that it's not just simply 4 years to report. They do have much longer to report now that legislation has passed, and get the help that they need.
Yeah. So the bill is House Bill 247. Is that right? So can you just kind of tell us in a nutshell, what does that bill now say? What did you get changed?
So the statute of limitations, when I started, stated 4 years from the date of the crime occurring to report. What the law now states is that a person that has a sexual crime committed against them between the ages of 14 and 17, they now have until age 28 to report. So potentially they have up to 14 years to report. It's definitely not long enough. I completely acknowledge that. It's definitely not long enough. That's why my next piece of legislation, when that gets worked up, is to remove the statute of limitations on sex crimes against minors. But right now, a victim has until age 18 or 28.
Now, is that some 28? Yeah. Is that something that you're working on right now?
I'm just getting started.
You're just getting started on that one.
Yep.
So it's been a while, what, 4 or 5 years since all of that. So what goes through your mind as you're looking back from the time that you stepped out and pioneered this change of law until right now?
I'm very proud of myself. I stepped into a process that I literally knew nothing about. And I had to tell my story to a lot of strangers and be very public and vocal about it, and allow for my face to be put on the front page of papers, and know that suddenly my story is out there for anybody to read about or listen to. And I just had to become okay suddenly with the whole world knowing that I had been a victim of sexual assault. And looking back over everything that I had to do to get to where this bill became law, I remember the total terror that I lived with every day going through that process, and how just getting up every day and just going to work and being a mom and doing everyday things, how challenging that was. But I did it. And I didn't fall back into the state of depression that I was when I first started seeking counseling, and I didn't become suicidal, and I didn't completely break down and lose my mind. In fact, I became stronger as the process went on. And I really expected that going through the process, it was going to beat me up and tear me down. And instead, it empowered me. And I feel like it gave me a voice that I didn't have before, and that sharing my story could possibly help other people, whether they're victims of my perpetrator or other perpetrators. And all I ever wanted to do was help at least one person with what I was working on, and I did that. So I'm completely grateful that I was able to work through that process, and I knew that God was by my side the whole time. I felt him through the entire process, and I had the support through my church and my counselor and a couple of close friends. And it was just amazing to come out on the other side of that and see what I had accomplished, what we had accomplished, because it definitely wasn't a one-person thing.
Well, I am so proud of you too. I just love you so much. Thank you so much for agreeing to come tell your story. I know it cannot be easy, but you do it with such grace. And so I want to thank you for sharing that. And as we come to a close today, I guess I just want to know what words of wisdom or advice do you have if there's someone that's listening right now that says, "Oh my gosh, everything that Jenna has said is resonating with me. I need to come out. I need to tell somebody." What words of wisdom or advice can you give that person?
A great question. The one thing that I always tell people around me when I speak about my story is if you're a victim of sexual assault, it's not your fault. It is absolutely not your fault. Please do not blame yourself. It was the other person's decision. It was not your fault. For anybody that may need assistance in reporting or just unpacking any kind of assault like that, any kind of trauma like that, there are resources out there. There's the Hope Crisis line. It's 1-800-656-HOPE. And they've got crisis counselors on call all of the time. And you can be anonymous when you call. You can hide in your closet with the closet door shut so that nobody hears you, and you can just tell everything that is going on inside of you. You can go to your church. You can go to your friends. You can go to your city hall even. I know that here in Utah, in Clearfield City, we have a victims advocate that's on staff. And so those that are in Clearfield City, they can reach out to a victims advocate at any time and get resources on counseling and therapy, housing resources if they need to relocate, all sorts of different things. So there's a lot of resources out there. So I would say pray on it, seek God's guidance, and seek his strength and his comfort. God is there, even in our mess, actually, especially in our mess. And he's not going to fail in you. He will help guide you and walk you through what it is that you need to do if you will just listen and be open and honest about what you're dealing with. God already knows. He knows what you've gone through, but it takes your faith and your courage to step into that faith for him to carry you through like he carried me through.
That is beautiful advice. Thank you for sharing. Listeners, we are going to have all of that information in the show notes. So if you didn't catch the number or any of those resources, we're going to have them printed for you. You'll also have access to my website, where there is a place where you can reach out to me as well. And so I will definitely work on getting you the resources that you need. And Jenna has offered up to be available as well. So if you're listening to this podcast today and you find yourself in that space where you do want to come out and get assistance, please reach out to us. You are not alone. You have someone that will walk alongside you in this journey as well. So Jenna, this has been such a great educational and emotional time with you. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your story. And this is going to help, again, so many people. And so you are such a brave, brave soul. And I want to thank you, and I love you. And until next time. Thank you for joining me and Jenna on the Juggling Life Finding Balance podcast. If you or someone you know needs help, please contact the RAIN National Hotline at 1-800-656-4673. And check out today's show notes for more important information, resources, and phone numbers. Until next time.